The Bookshelf with me, Ryan Tubridy, is brought to you by Ballymore. Founded by Sean Mulryan in 1982, Ballymore has long put arts and culture at the heart of what it does, from supporting artists and performers to weaving creativity into the neighbourhoods it builds. Alongside this cultural commitment, Ballymore creates places with soul. Its international portfolio is filled with award-winning workspaces, homes, shopping centres and entire neighbourhoods across Dublin, London, Bratislava, Prague and Berlin. Places where design, innovation and creativity come together and where people can live, work and play. Well, today on The Bookshelf, I'm delighted to welcome one of Britain's most recognisable and best-loved actors. He's also an all-round good guy, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. He's Hugh Bonneville, and he's back on the big screen more recently in Downton Abbey, the grand finale, and celebrating the release of his brand new book. It's called Rory Sparkes and the Elephant in the Room. But today we are turning the spotlight away from the movie sets and the TV shows to talk about the stories that shaped him. And here he is. Hugh, welcome again. Nice to see you.
Lovely to see you, Ryan.
First of all, I have got to comment on the head to toe in green. Is that just an accident or is it a tribute to the fact
it's a tribute to the old country, you know?
You look great.
Thank you very
well
much.
turned out, I have to say.
You.
You're a busy man. And one of the last times we met, I'm glad to say, was I think in my house. Let's face it, we had a lovely
red wine, as I remember.
We had a nice
night.
glass of red after the Late Late Show, where you would come in with the great Alan Leach, who was in as your wingman that night, I think.
I think he was filming in Ireland, so he got in a car after filming and came up to visit, and we had a lovely evening.
And then we all ended up by the fire shooting the breeze. And I thought, okay, well, if we're doing that, we're going to be okay, and that, which is great. So it's nice. You have a lot going on in your world at the moment, obviously. I went to see the Downton film recently, and it was beautiful, and I would imagine quite kind of sad for you. This is the end of a long old road.
Well, yeah, on and off for 15 years, we were part of that team. And but we had really said goodbye to it a while ago, I suppose, because when the TV show finished, none of us thought we'd get a movie together, let alone three. So I always felt that we'd said goodbye. But I do think the one difference on the final movie, knowing it really, really, really was the last movie, was I think I took mental snapshots in each room and each location just to say, right, this is the last. Don't take this. This is no longer sort of your office. It's coming to an end now.
Yeah.
So I have obviously such fond memories of the whole thing.
Were you writing your children's book in between Rory Sparkes during the filming of that, or was
no? Actually, at the time I was thinking about it, I suppose. My memoir had come out, and out of that was born Rory Sparkes, really, because my publisher or my editor rather, had talked about how much time I seemed to spend in my childhood, writing about my childhood. Yeah. And so from that really was the springboard into some of the adventures of Rory Sparkes, who was a fairly thinly disguised version of me.
Okay. Well, let's go back to the unvarnished truth of you as a boy, because we're going to pick your first book, which is the book from your childhood. Before we get to that book, give us a sense of the family home as you, as a 7-8-year-old, running around in your pajamas or whatever it was. Was it a happy home, a sad home, a busy home?
No, it was a happy home. It was I was 6 years younger than my sister and 8 years younger than my brother. And by the time we were living, the formative years that really stay with me are around that era. And we were living in southeast London in Blackheath. And my dad was a surgeon and working a fair bit at Greenwich District Hospital nearby, but also at the urology hospitals in London, St. Peter's, St. Paul's and St. Philip's, known as the Pissing Apostles. And so he spent all his time on the road between those various hospitals. And Mum at that stage was a stay-at-home mum, managing the three of us in various ways. And I lived in a fairly leafy street and had fairly innocuous, as I thought at the time, adventures with my pals up and down the road.
Yeah. You say innocuous as you thought, but they were consequential, clearly.
Well, they were, because I can remember, most of them have ended up in the book.
Yeah.
Because when I said to my agent, why do you think I should write a children's book? Because I haven't got a hinterland of a chocolate factory or a load of wizards. And she said, well, the bit when the elephant came into your playground that you wrote about in your memoir, was that true? And I said, absolutely. Yeah. The kids from the circus came to school with their elephant. And also, did you dig a grave for your sister when you were about 8? And I said, yeah, completely. She had to go. And she said, well, maybe that's the start of the children's book. So I thought, well, maybe life in South East London wasn't quite as boring as I thought. So, the circus really did come to town, and the kids came to school with their elephant, which I'm sure wouldn't be allowed to happen these days.
Health and safety would be an issue there, I think. Your father, you said, was a surgeon, and it was in the urology department. And was he a good man, a nice man?
He was a dear man,
Was he?
and I lost him just before the pandemic. And he was a wonderful pianist, and I used to listen to him practice before he went off to work in the morning. And I was always very impatient that I couldn't play as well as him, so I was a useless musician.
What did he like to play?
He loved Schubert. He liked some Scott Joplin. He loved Beethoven. I mean, I think he found Schubert was really his go-to.
Wow.
So I used to love lying in bed, before getting up for school and hearing him practicing. And he kept it right on. And interestingly, music, they say, stays with the faculties longest. And he sailed into the dementia fog, but the ability to play music was still there for really quite a long time. And it was only when he started getting arthritis in his hands and he could no longer play his beloved Baby Grand. And that's when he said, it's time for me to go to the home, that he'd been going to this dementia daycare, which also had a residential facility, and he chose. And we were so lucky because so many families have to sort of invent reasons why it's time to go into the care home. Either it's after the fall, so many people have a fall, and then, we need to just let you go here to recuperate and you'll be going home soon. And it's a sort of bit of a white lie to try and get them to go into care when the family can't cope, And we were so fortunate, that Dad recognised that he could no longer cope. Mum had passed away several years before. And we were again fortunate. He was very happy in his dementia. He had a tiny bit of Alzheimer's, which I don't quite know all the definitions, but he wasn't an angry man ever. And with great charm and dignity, he went to the end really. And he was always good company. In fact, books. He grew up on Kipling. Kipling was his go-to. So I remember reading him Kipling on the final days.
As he was saying, kind of, as you say, sailing into the dementia fog. What a beautiful way of putting it, because so many people listening, including myself, who understand that language. You say the fall. Immediately I knew what you were talking about, because for people who aren't in this world, when somebody of a certain vintage falls, it tends to accelerate, doesn't it? That road towards, as you said.
It can do, and like fog, suddenly there are little moments where it parts, and you can see what was there, what is still there. And so that's the conundrum, I think, about the soul and the spirit and old age and everything to do with who we are. Is that our identity is there, and it's hard to define when it goes, But my father, no, he was always a gentleman with a bit of a twinkle, and he was to the end.
The twinkle in the eye.
Yeah.
So he's one of those people you go, there's mischief in the air.
There was, and I remember when growing up in southeast London, and we'd have these big family parties. He was part of a generation that actually sort of lived together during the war in southwest London, in East Sheen. And he used to talk about, again, in the dementia years, there were certain stories that repeat and reoccur, and they're obviously so vivid to him. And he'd talk about picking up the shrapnel from the lawn. Him and his twin brother, that was their job on a Sunday afternoon before someone got the croquet set out or whatever it might be. And of course there were gun emplacements in Richmond Park, which was just over the road from where he grew up. And the cousins he shared those years with were very, very close. Yeah. And so there was always a family party sort of every summer, or maybe a Christmas one as well. But Dad was the one who always went around, and there'd be a big ice bucket for the beers or the lemonades or whatever. But he was always the one who started putting the ice down everybody's back, and sort of chaos would ensue. And you'd see the sort of maids and aunts who've disapproved and sitting there in their chairs with their parasols, or the youngsters who thought that my dad was all the fun and the games of the party.
How old were you when your mum passed away?
Hang on. She died in 2014. So,
so you weren't a kid.
So I wasn't a kid. No. But it was the phone message came from my brother, and I thought he was going to. I was a long, long way away, and I just assumed it was going to be Dad who'd passed, and it was a complete shock. With Mum, she'd been frail, but it was a bit of a sudden, a 12-hour thing, and she passed away. So, yeah, and that was the big, that was the big change, because I think actually, and again, I think perhaps people of a certain generation with older parents will recognise this, they'd slightly covered for each other in terms of their frailties.
Interesting, yeah.
To the extent that, we discovered that they'd actually, I think there'd been a danger of a fire in the hall or something, and they'd sort of covered that up a bit, or they'd lost keys so many times and they had the keys changed. Anyway, the thing that really showed me where Dad was in terms of vulnerability was when he said, we said, Daddy, we're going to have to start getting you some help in the home now, now that Mum's gone. And he said, I'll just go to the pub. I'll be fine. I'll go to the pub. So we can't quite do that. And I really realised when things were tricky when he put his coffee cup in the washing machine. So I sort of thought, I know, you can sort of see the thought process. I need to clean the thing, so I'll put it in the machine that cleans things. But it wasn't the dishwasher, it was the washing machine. So that's when I thought, right, this is a little more serious than one thought.
It's a curious thing how they were plotting their deception, because they knew, having seen how it works, that any suggestion that they were on that road, high alert from you and your siblings, and all roads leading to the home or the next bit or the end.
I think they were so invincible to me.
Yeah,
and the idea of them owning their frailty was a very hard thing. I think they were proud people. Yes. They were real doers. They were amazingly good in the community with helping others. They always put others first. They both grew up in the National Health Service. Mum had trained as a nurse, so they were always out there, in the village where they lived, doing stuff for others. They never put themselves first. They were remarkable. And I think the idea of them showing any vulnerability in that regard, and I think it's instinctive. You do cover, you think, it's just, he's a bit, he's a bit forgetful, or she can't quite pick things up in the way that she used to. So I think they inevitably protected each other.
Yeah. And the thought of being dependent on anyone else.
Yes, that's right. They certainly didn't want to be a pain to anybody else. Absolutely not. Yeah.
Your dad, that's really intriguing that, your dad was the science and arts. I love that combination, that he could be a doctor and a piano player casually and a reader, a book lover. So you were there was a house of multiple shelves. Was it like that?
It was. There were lots of books, and I wasn't a great reader, but Dad loved his biographies, and he loved reading about experts. He said, you should read this on so and so. He's an expert in his field. Everybody was an expert, but he was a particularly. I'm trying to remember the name of the writer, not Morgan. Anyway, there was. In the same way that I suppose Just Jennings and those books were important to me when I was sort of 8 to 11, about the sort of adventures of a kid in shorts or at school. He had an equivalent. I think they were written by someone like R.M. Morgan or something. He said, you've got to read these. And I tried them. And of course they were set in the 1910s or 20s, and they had no relevance to my thoughts at all.
It's like us showing our kids Planes, Trains and Automobiles or Ferris Bueller and saying this, and it's going, it hasn't aged well, or whatever it might be, but exactly. It's kind of an equivalent to an extent.
Exactly. So yes, it's a generational thing. But Kipling, Dad was a member of the Kipling Society.
Oh, of course he was,
and loved the Just So stories and the poems, of course. So he was very much an influence. And as I say, they were both, Mum and Dad, into opera and loved going. But they loved going to all the arts. They really did. And they took me and my brother and sister to the theatre a lot. And I mean, the first Shakespeare I saw was Midsummer Night's Dream at the Aldwych in 1970. So I was 6 or 7.
How well you remember? That's
good. I do, because I can remember it was a famous production. I think Helen Mirren was in it, actually. Right. But it was Peter Brook's famous production, and it was all set in this sort of white box. And I can't remember much of the detail, but I do remember this big red feather that was Titania's bower. And it stayed with me ever since. And it was one of the seeds that that were planted to do with my love of theatre, really. Yeah. And I'm thrilled that I'm going back to I'm going to do a play called Shadowlands at the Aldwych in February of this next year.
How do you feel about that?
I feel really excited. I feel quite sort of. I don't know, it just feels such a sort of full circle.
Have you ever acted in that theatre before?
No.
What a lovely symmetry.
I know, it's amazing. So I've seen shows there, obviously, over the years, but stepping onto the stage actually a few weeks ago just to go and see the theatre.
How was that?
it was very, very exciting. I mean, I am a complete romantic about theatre. It's where I, first went to lock myself in or be shut in a dark room with loads of strangers to be entertained. And
yes.
It's that's never left me, that excitement.
Did you close your eyes? I mean, I don't want to over-egg it, but did you find yourself remembering and reminiscing about 6-year-old you in the audience?
No, I didn't at that moment, but I did think, if this comes off, if we do this play here, it will just feel so wonderfully apposite,
Oh, it's amazing.
Because theatre's been such an important part of my life, and coming back to it a little bit more now. I did Uncle Vanya in America earlier this year, and I've got plans to do more theatre. It's where I started out. It's what got me into this business, and it's the storytelling that I enjoy most.
Let's go back to your childhood, because you've said something very, very, that I love that you admitted to us a few minutes ago, Hugh, which was, I'm not a great reader, or I wasn't a great reader. I don't know if you are now. We'll come to that in a second. So as a kid, did you run away from books, or did you hide behind the book covers, or were you into them? Or
I was.
And what book are you going to bring us to for your first book of the day?
Well, probably a mixture of a couple, really.
Yeah, come on.
I mean, books were very much part of my childhood, and I remember we'd have to sort of learn a poem a week in school and recite that, and equally writing was a great part of our school life, as well as reading a book, either I think together with the class, or certainly encouraged to at home. So the books I remember reading first are the Paddington books, which of course has come full circle again.
Full circle, yeah.
Yeah, and a book that really stayed with me, and I thought it was an old classic, but I looked it up not so long ago. It was only written in the late 60s, I think. It was called Stig of the Dump.
Oh, well, I remember the TV show Stig of the Dump, which when I was a kid, I didn't realise it was a series. Book series, I should say, just one book.
No, it was just the one book from what I remember.
And that was in your life.
That was in my life, and I can remember the cover so vividly. And I found it not so long ago in the sort of family archive, so to speak, in a box. And I was so thrilled that the cover, the illustration on the cover, was exactly as I'd remembered it. The colour was a sort of salmony brown colour, and with a bit of blue on it, and I can't even remember the details of the story now, apart from thinking that every time I went into the garden, I went to this bush at the back of the garden to see if Stig was there by any chance.
Okay.
And Asterix and Tintin, obviously not quite literature, but...
but anything that involves reading is reading.
That's
so there's
true.
No snobbery in this program.
No, I absolutely... And my parents were they weren't strict about it, but they said, well, get it for you in English, but you've got to read it in French first. And my French was never good enough. But gradually, as I got older and I had a little bit of French, I could see the wit of the English translation.
Yes,
vital statistics, dogmatics, all these words translated.
Yeah.
I just thought it was genius, and the stories are so good, and Tintin too for the same reason.
Lovely. So you're going to go with, of all those, if you were to pick one, would you?
I probably have to. Well, Paddington, it was a series of books, obviously, but I think I'd go with Stig of the Dump. Yeah.
I don't know if I mentioned I went to see The Weir recently, and Brendan Gleeson is he's crawling around the stage like a whiskey sodden lion, and it's beautiful to watch. It really is stunning. But he also was one of your co-stars in Paddington 2.
Paddington 2. Knuckles McGinty.
Knuckles McGinty. I mean, honestly, Knuckles McGinty in the prison serving up the slop
with his baguette. Yes.
So, have you enjoyed the Paddington experience, the movies?
I have. It's been a very joyous. I mean, don't get me wrong, difficult thing to make. I mean, technically really tricky. And
a lot of green screen, is that it?
There's a fair amount of green screen, and obviously the bear doesn't always show up for work, and so you've got those issues. But the co-stars were just wonderful.
Where's the bear when he's not turning up for work?
He's usually in his trailer with a huge amount of marmalade on the go.
Yeah,
you know what it's like.
Quite a divo.
These stars.
Yeah.
But no, I mean Brendan was just a joy, and Hugh Grant was just. I thought he was amazing. In that film.
Very good.
And then the third film we've had Antonio and Olivia Colman all having an absolute blast.
What a success that was! And it spawned. I see there's stage shows.
Yes, I'm dying to see it. I gather. Yes, the stage show is opening quite soon here in London, so I can't wait.
You'll be there. Yeah. So when you say to your father, who's a medical man, and your mother, who's a stay-at-home mum but a nurse with medical background, that you want to get into acting, it sounds to me that they'd be pretty cool with that. or was there any resistance?
No, they were just practical, really. I mean, again, they were incredibly supportive, and I joined the National Youth Theatre in my teens, and that was a real game changer for me. Because I started meeting kids from completely different walks of lives, from completely different backgrounds. I'd grown up in this cloistered world of Southeast London, leafy suburb, and boarding school, and then suddenly I was meeting kids from miners' children from the northeast, or a bank clerk's daughter from Belfast, I remember, and we were all just linked up because we liked doing plays. And
what was it? Was it a trigger to get into the acting world, or a process, or was it a performance you saw, or was it a series of events?
It was a series of events, really. I'd always, my dad and I had this sort of rather romantic pipe dream that he'd retire from being a surgeon and we'd both read for the bar together in some sort of garret with a candle burning.
Like a Dickensian scene.
That we'd study our law books. And I was quite happy with that. I used to love going to the law courts in my vacations. Sometimes the Old Bailey, which of course was, the exciting, page-turning stuff. But I also, tragically, really enjoyed going to the courts, to the Chancery, and watching really dull tax cases.
Why?
I don't know.
Were you watching performances of
sorts? I guess I must have been.
The lawyers are acting a role. They're all to be and the judges, it's all so over, and the costumes. And I mean, it is theatre.
I guess it must have been.
Except with real-life consequences.
Well, there's that. But it must have been, because I remember going to watch Lord Denning, who was Master of the Rolls, and he had this slight Hampshire burr, and he spoke quite slowly when he was summing up, but it was always like a little folk tale.
Yeah.
So he said, and let's say it's some boring VAT case that he was trying to adjudicate, and he'd say, so were a man to take 14 bushels of his wheat that he has laboured hard on the land for, and take them to the market town, and there he were to leave them in the marketplace while he goes to have a much-needed draught of ale, and were he to come back to find that this had been sold, and I was just mesmerised by this homespun philosophy. I'm sure all the lawyers were going, oh, come on.
Here we go again.
Here we go again.
It's like Bernard Cribbins telling a story to children.
But I found it absolutely delightful. And the Court of Appeal, I just used to love going to hear these much bigger cases which were arguing on the point of a pin. So I thought, well, that's for me. And so when I just left school and I was going to go to university, and I, through a friend of a friend, got this, I got to shadow a QC for a couple of days and followed him around in chambers and then court and all that, and found it just great. I said, great, sign me up for the Inns of Court. I know you have to sign up for these dinners or whatever you call them, and because I'm going to be a barrister. And I said, here we go, I'll join your Inn of Court. And he said, no. I said, why not? He said, come back in 3 years' time when you've done university, and then we'll talk. And it was the best thing ever, because during that 3-year period, I really did look at what I wanted to do, did many more plays at university at Cambridge, and then thought, actually, I'd love to give acting a go. Yeah. I'd rather, spend 3 years getting it wrong than, the rest of my life in a pinstripe suit wondering if I could have done it. So, and that's when I came out to my parents and said, I'd love to give it a go. And they said, well, we've, seen you in enough shows now to know that you're not wasting it, that it's how passionate you are. So give it a go.
Okay. A nice honesty to it rather than anything else. Did you, at that stage, were you reading when you were in college and beyond college? Did you find yourself drawn to bookshops and the like, or did you feel, well, I'm reading scripts and I'm also having too much fun, so I'll just kind of drift from it a little bit?
Yeah, I was not a great recreational reader.
Yeah.
I read, a lot of I was studying theology, and I was captivated by the synoptic problem, which is a thing in the New Testament, why Matthew, Mark and Luke's Gospels are so similar and yet so different, and what they're and it really got me into thinking about editorialization, and how there's very little, there's not really very much historical truth. Everything is an angle from whichever way you look at it. So Matthew, for example, has the story of the three kings, but no shepherds. Luke has shepherds, but no kings. Yeah. Mark has no nativity at all. So you're beginning to see the notion of editorializing. What angle are they trying to tell? Yeah. Not that they were written in. It's more complex than that, obviously.
Of course it is.
But those two examples give you a good idea that Matthew's gospel, as put together, has a more sort of the King David tradition, whereas the Luke's gospel has much more of the shepherds and the humility and the humble people of the land sort of angle.
You're bringing up two interesting points here. One is that you study theology, which I wanted to ask you about. When you have the world's educational choices at your feet as to what you want to do, history, politics, the classics, whatever it might be, you went with theology. Was that nudged from somewhere, or did?
Yeah, it was. I was never, I was never a person of faith particularly. I always say I went into Cambridge atheist and I came out agnostic. Many of my dons were ordained, but they managed to sort of park their faith to one side and they just concentrated on the academic subject that we were looking at. But nevertheless, it's like studying politics when you know that most of your dons are rabid communists, or the other way.
Yeah, you leave your beliefs at the door nearly, and
you hope so. And but I was no, not a person of faith. But I did have a teacher at my school who really just suddenly made, particularly the New Testament, come alive, and like a detective novel. Like, why is Matthew like this? Why is
what's the teacher's name?
Well, he's Paul Carling.
You see, everyone has a teacher who just changes everything.
Yeah.
So Mr. Carling,
Mr. Carling was quite something, and in fact, he was only a handful of years older than us. But in those days, when you're 16,
they're 100.
They're 100. He'd recently left university and came in with this sort of
Dead Poet Society,
completely
Captain My Captain,
and he was a really nice bloke,
relatable almost,
relatable, yes.
Yeah.
And he wasn't an old fusty old teacher. He was just fun. And funnily enough, I saw him 2 weeks ago, and he's still fun and delightful. And and I'm always appreciative of him, and he sort of brushes it aside. But I don't know whether he had the effect on other people at all. They may not have had that thing at all.
The great teachers bring great things alive. A good teacher will, I always say this, the equation being a great history teacher brings history alive. A bad history teacher will kill it at birth. and ditto for maths, and ditto for English and so on.
That's interesting. That's a very interesting point, because I thought I was going to love history, and I just had a teacher that didn't really do it for me, and I dropped history very early on.
What a shame! But theology is a history of sorts, and
of course, and
it allows you to. In fact, we spoke because of that documentary you made. You were a guest on the show.
That's right.
Which was theologically based. You were out in the Middle East, if I'm not mistaken, and
I did a show in Easter called Countdown to Calvary, and it was a study of the week leading up to the crucifixion. Yeah. But crucially, in that, I said to the documentary makers, I want to stop telling the story on the Friday night of the Passion, because Sunday, the rolling back of the stone and the empty tomb, that requires faith, and I don't have that, and I'd feel hypocritical talking about.
Respectful approach to
Well,
it.
I think so. Because I can completely believe in the historical Jesus. I can completely believe in the context of the passions of that time and at the Passion.
Yeah.
And it was fascinating to be in Jerusalem and to discover really how small it is and how much it swelled during Passover. And if you've got an occupying force like the Romans, how it becomes this tinderbox.
Yeah. The language you're using is resonating today.
Well,
isn't
of
it
course.
Extraordinary all these years later?
Absolutely. So it was really became a fascinating subject for me. And you realise that, yes, tragically, how much religion is the heart of so much conflict.
So is the book that changed your life relevant to what we're talking about now then? Is that what you would say, the book that...
Well, so yes, the book that changed my life, of course, was the Bible, in because I got to read it more carefully. I am no expert. I don't want people saying, what happens in Deuteronomy 4, chapter 3?
In that voice.
Or, well, of course, this is the truth because it's in Timothy, and then you can contradict it by saying, well, hang on, that's the truth also because it's in Romans or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
So, you can always use the Bible to quote whatever you want.
What is the truth?
What is the truth?
There you go.
But again, going back to what I was saying about the accretion of story and the editorializing, so many religions have their, by necessity, not by necessity, but almost by virtue of their history, acres of tradition that have accreted into stories, and some of them written down, and they become the holy book. So the Bible, really, I've only read a lot of it once. I'm not I can't quote it chapter and verse, but it is a fascinating insight into so much history and the history of so many different religions conflicting and competing, and will always be a source of interest to me.
Have you read Colm Tóibín's book, The Testament of Mary? And if not, Will you please buy it?
No.
Okay,
and
it's
I've heard
100
of it.
pages
Yeah.
of this short.
Yeah.
And it imagines Mary. It's not comedy, but I always read it like a comedy of Mary, the Virgin Mary, and the apostles are knocking on the door to say, will you endorse? We're writing this book, and we would love you to help out. And it's a bit odd, but she's going, look, my son died in a most gruesome way, and you're trying to flog a book. And it's done in a most interesting way, looking at her and saying, my son, it's not easy when your son it becomes the Messiah. Like,
Does it cause could it cause offence to those of faith?
Not anymore.
No.
I think there would have been a time when it would have been burnt in the streets, but for whatever reason. And she said, he used to go off and give these speeches, and he'd come back and his voice was all reedy because he was kind of a bit high on his own supply. It's done like that. It's quite tender.
That's interesting.
And it's the frustration of a mother that her son has become not just a superstar, excuse the musical reference, but actually has become the Messiah himself.
Yeah.
So that's another one that I quite like.
That's interesting. You mentioned the documentary I made in Jerusalem.
Yes.
I interviewed various experts, be they archaeologists or first century historians, either of Judaism or of early Roman history, of that period of Roman history. And I think nearly all of them mentioned Monty Python's Life of Brian.
They have to,
as a sort of really good reference.
It's constantly like the Judea's People Front, crucifixion. It's all the lines.
I mean, but how weirdly sort of appropriate that analysis was.
Yeah.
That need for the Messiah, that feeling of being oppressed, the latching on to whichever cult was around that would give them a sense of freedom from this pressure they were under, and the passing of blame and all those sorts of things. It was so interesting.
But the Jesus Christ Superstar, if you take the Judas in that, talking about, it's not, look, if I didn't do this, if I didn't kiss him on the cheek, he wouldn't have been able to fulfill his, I'm doing history a favor here.
Sure,
give me a break. It throws up so much. I mean, it's the ultimate epic of a story. Let's face it.
And I remember, I interviewed the great Israeli writer Amos Oz, who very sweetly said he only agreed to the interview because his wife liked Downton Abbey.
What a door opener!
But he'd written a book about Judas and exploring that whole theme of destiny.
Of
really,
destiny. On a lighter note, the book. So you got into acting eventually. Obviously, as you got out of the theology world, you weren't tempted to join the clergy or.
No, it wasn't. No,
it wasn't. It was purely your degree.
It was purely an area of academic historical interest, really, for me. And no, I'd not taken the leap of faith, which is what you need.
But you marched on regardless, and into the acting world. And what a outrageously successful career you've had to date. You like when I say that, you frown, and I'm just curious: is that just because you don't want to be necessarily praised, or is it because you don't believe you've fulfilled your potential?
Oh no, I think it's. I just feel so ridiculously lucky. You know?
You?
I was at drama school with people way more talented than me that just didn't get the breaks.
So why didn't they get the breaks?
Don't know, because life's
just
like
life.
that.
Yeah,
it's crazy. And I can look back over my career and link every bit of the chain back to 2 or 3 things that happened when I was 18, or when I was sort of 21, coming out of drama school. My letter asking if I could have an audition at Regent's Park happened to land on the artistic director's desk on a day when he happened to be thinking, maybe I will cast now for the next season. I got my equity card that way. I got my first job at the National through a bit of luck and
sliding doors.
It's all sliding doors. And, of course, yes, there's talent involved, but really it's about getting yourself in the way of Lady Luck is really what it is. And I get so many letters from and messages from young people saying, how do I, what do I do? What do I do? And I always say, this industry doesn't owe you anything. And that it certainly won't come to your door if you sit by the phone staring at it angrily, so you've got more chance of luck coming your way if you are somehow in the environment in which luck can strike,
Yes.
be it working in a box office or, as Simon Callow famously did, he wrote about being in the box office at the Old Vic before he sort of got his breaks, or being in the wardrobe department or painting a set. I don't know. It may sound ridiculous, but at least you're in the world that you want to
Get
be
into
in.
Get onto that planet. Yeah.
And then it's just a lot of luck along the way. So I feel extremely fortunate that I've kept working.
Do you have, when we talk about all the enormous roles you've played, do you have a sort of a rosebud element, to use the kind of Citizen Kane moment in your acting career where you were happiest, in a sense that, you know, you might have been young, free and easy and, you know, long-haired and enjoying life as a young actor? Were you happier then rather than more accomplished and older with all the riches, if you will? Or does it change with the seasons?
I think the thing I always think, go with whatever pops into your head at that moment, and
yes,
and I reserve the right to change my answer
what
next
jumped
week.
Into your head this time?
But the one that jumped into my head this time was the 2 or 3 days in about September 2001, it must have been, when I was at the Royal Shakespeare Company and we'd opened one play. While rehearsing a second one, then we opened the second play, then we started rehearsing the third, playing the first two, then we rehearsed the third, then we opened the third, and while rehearsing the fourth, then we opened the fourth. And there was 1 week in that autumn of 2001 where we would have done Two Gentlemen of Verona, The Alchemist, Tis Pity She's a Whore, and The Virtuoso, one after the other, with largely the same group of actors.
How?
One would have been an evening show, then a matinee, then an evening, and that sense of being in a company and using all, different mental muscles for each of those shows. And I was playing a double act in 2 of them with my best mate, and being in the company, the proper RSC, the proper Royal Shakespeare Company. That was one of the happiest moments of my career. Because it's what I'd always wanted to do ever since I first saw Midsummer Night's Dream at the Royal Shakespeare Company at the Aldwych.
Yeah, back in that old, and now about to tread the stage once more in that particular stage. I just love that. We're coming to a close of our chat today, Hugh. Thanks for being here. I really I'm enjoying our chat. It's just short a glass of something, but we'll do that next time. And the book that brought you joy. What book are you? You're smiling already in advance of the answer of this answer.
It's funny because they're not amazing works of literature, but the books of Tom Sharp.
Oh yes,
who wrote the Wilt books and wrote a couple set in South Africa and a wonderful satires on apartheid. They're genuinely funny, and I can remember reading one of them when I was about 14 and I'd come out of a hospital having had an appendicitis and literally having to hold my stitches as I was reading this book because it was making me laugh. Yeah.
So that's great.
And in the same week I went to see, I think it was Return of the Pink Panther, which was a big
Another
mistake.
one, yeah.
So I was absolutely glutton for punishment.
And this is all courtesy of your brother, is it?
That's right.
Your big brother with a great influence when the brother's handing stuff down.
Yeah, and he passed away very suddenly in his sleep in 2018, I think it was. He was 62 and, went like that and completely unexpected. So that was a real wake-up call and made me reflect back on we were 8 years apart, so it was quite a big difference.
Yes,
and he was a complicated man. He loved his theatre. He worked in insurance, but he loved his Amdram.
What does complicated mean?
He was a difficult soul. When he was 18 or so and I was 10, he was in a lot of pain physically, and he didn't really know how to express. Didn't know that he had a hip issues and a back issue. He had Perthes disease and a back issue as well. And he was quite cantankerous and quite bitter, and yet publicly wonderful. But in the family, it was quite tense at times.
Okay.
But
he had this legacy.
He gave me these. I remember he introduced me to those books and made me laugh. But also he introduced me to comedy generally.
Really?
Tom Lehrer. And,
Tom Lehrer, the late, yeah.
Yeah. And Round the Horn. I mean, this was a slightly different era, but he...
Smart comedy.
But it was smart comedy. Yeah. And Python. I mean, he absolutely introduced me to Python, as did my dad. But and my brother would, talk to me about why Peter Sellers was so... he said, listen to this. Look at what he does with his voice here. Yeah. And things like that. And Marty Feldman and all that sort of era, and particularly Dudley Moore and Peter Cook as well.
Offbeat smart comedy. That's great. We had Dave Allen was a regular in our house. Storytelling and just a bit wry,
Yeah,
droll. I like
wonderful.
a bit of droll,
Yeah.
like yourself. But it's important, all these influences in our life.
Completely.
Obviously, you've written, we've talked about autobiography before, but now in 2025, which is where we are now, coming to the end of it, am I going to ask you for the name of a new autobiography that you're going to write in the future, and for a name that you would put on the cover of this story of your life to this point?
I've always thought I'd put this. I think this would be on my tombstone, and therefore a good name for an autobiography. Oh, him.
Okay, give us the context for "Oh Him," please.
Well, I think I grew up in a family, as I say, where mum and dad were all about deflecting from their own achievements or their own talents. I mean, my dad was just a man in a suit who smelt a bit of antiseptic, until the day I went to get some keys off him at the hospital he was working at in town. And they said, "Oh, he's down in theatre. You can pop down to the operating theatre level." And I went down. I got out, came out of the lift, and there was this man in scrubs, with all the funny, tissue hat on and everything, and coming towards me. And I thought, "Oh my God, my dad actually saves lives. That's what he does. He goes in to try and save people's lives or make their lives better. He's not just a man in a suit who puts ice down the cousin's, dress at the Christmas party, at our family parties. And he's not just the man who's always pulling funny faces or whatever. He's a man of great skill and great earnestness, but he wears it so lightly, and carries that talent and that dedication very, very lightly. So I think maybe that's where I've inherited this sense of, it's just, I've often said, it's just prancing around in tights. I think particularly the effect of Downton has had on people around the world. I mean, I got a letter yesterday from someone saying, "I lost my mum recently, and the solace I get from watching Downton," because we used to watch it together. Wow. And you think, actually, what we do, it is not saving lives, it is not changing the world, but it is giving people a release from.
We'll go back to "Oh Him" then.
So "Oh Him" is just, I suppose, it's just so I can hear my mum saying, not quite, better than you ought to be, but it's a sort of, no, it's okay, just,
steady.
Yeah, steady now. And yeah, I know they were incredibly proud of what I did, when things became more prominent in what I did. And that's a double-edged sword, as we all know.
Yeah.
But because all I ever really wanted to be was telling stories in the dark on a stage. And then, as you say, suddenly you're sort of ending up at places like, well, I don't know, the White House or something that you just wouldn't have comprehended. So "Oh Him" really is, we are all just passing through.
Yes. We
may think that we make some impact on a generation, on our lives, but ultimately when the person who buys the house 3 generations down that you lived in, and they find this article, they'll go, "Oh, him," I mean, we don't actually, so that's why it matters to do something credible and constructive with your life now, I think.
Yeah,
because ultimately we're all just, "Oh, him" or "her."
It's a beautiful book title, and one I'll remember for a long time to come. Hugh, what a pleasure to have you with us today, and really, really thoroughly enjoyed our conversation.
Thanks, Ryan.
It's good to see. We'll do it again sometime.
I hope so.
This episode is brought to you by Ballymore, a company that creates places with soul, putting arts and culture at the heart of its work, alongside creating award-winning workspaces, homes and neighbourhoods across the UK, Ireland and wider Europe. To find out more about the places Ballymore is shaping, where people can live, work and play, visit ballymoregroup.com.